Episode of Chordplay, and it's the Chords of Europe. And Europe formed in Sweden in 1979 and became popular in Sweden and different parts of the country of Europe. And then eventually in the mid-80s, 1986, the Final Countdown was released, and that became an international, smash success. And definitely put the band and John Norum, on guitar on the map. And it was, a huge release. And definitely since that time, they've released, 11 studio albums, 3 live albums. And there was a change, like in the guitar department, went from John Norum to Keymarlo. And we featured both these guys in 3-for-all, lessons on the channel. And now we're going to look at some of their chord work. So I'm going to split Europe in half and look at 3 songs from John Norum, 3 songs from Keymarlo, just to keep this fair. But definitely, John Norum and Marcello are monster guitarists, and they have huge, fan bases worldwide. But there's really something magical about those, 80s albums with Europe, and they've continued, and they're still active today. As far as John Norum's concerned, he was a very respected guitarist, definitely, one of the original members of Europe, and then he left the group somewhere around 1986. And there is a solo album. He's released a bunch of solo albums. He's collaborated with other groups. He did return to Europe eventually. I think that was in the early 2000s. But in 1987, he released an album called Total Control. And I've talked to a lot of people that don't even remember that album. They didn't even realize he released an album after he left, Europe. And it loosely reminds me, not musically, but it loosely reminds me of what happened with John Sykes. When John Sykes left Whitesnake, he formed Blue Murder and put out this album that, in my opinion, that Blue Murder album is just dynamite. It's almost as great, if not better, than the Whitesnake, the self-titled 87 album. And then John Norum's, Total Control, he was definitely, kind of frustrated with Europe, and I think the direction the band was going in. And when you hear that album, his guitar playing is just on fire. It's like, wow, okay. Definitely came out swinging on that album, kind of like John Sykes. Musically it may not be the same style or the same sound, but you can definitely hear, he was really pushing, his music and his ability, just like John Sykes did after Whitesnake. It's interesting because the Final Countdown started to explode, and John Norum folded, out of the band. And he did appear, I believe, in the Final Countdown video. But then the very next music video, Rock the Night, Marcello magically, is in the video with the band. And it's interesting because everybody in the band remained the same, just the guitarist. John Norum left, Marcello came in, and a lot of people, I don't even think they noticed that there was a different guy. But Marcello is a monster guitarist, and his brother Rob is a monster too. I've met Rob a couple times at NAMM shows. But both Key and Rob are just dynamite, Swedish guitarists. They'll melt your face off, either one of them, or if you're sitting in front of both those guys, they'll probably just melt your whole family or whatever. They're just unstoppable, players. Very musical, very dynamic, they can shred and play all this really expressive and impressive, music. But they also have great tone and great feel, too. Just like John Norum. John Norum's the same way. But anyway, long story short here, Key did have a 90s REH instructional video that I highly recommend, and that way you can kind of, get a kind of a closer look at his guitar playing, his style, some of his ideas. He's breaking down some solos and stuff, talks about tone and all kinds of things. So if you haven't seen that, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, but check out Marcello's instructional video. And if you really want to check out Europe during that transitional period between John Norum and Marcello, there are 2, home videos, like concert videos. And one, like the Final Countdown 1986, and that's with John Norum. And then another one, I think it's like the Final Countdown World Tour, and that was in 1987 with Marcello. Same band, just different guitarists, and the same tour, technically, like the extended Final Countdown tour. But it's really cool to watch those 2 videos and notice, what they did with John. He had a solo in there somewhere, and then what they did with Key, and he had a solo in there too. But check those out if you really want to dive into Europe. With the opening, that's Rock the Night from the Final Countdown, and something like this. Something like that. But it starts and it's really heavy, you know, like the whole band is punching and hitting these chords. And it's, you know, the drums, the bass, the keys, and the guitar. But we're starting with this E power chord here. And then grab this F sharp and slide to G. And then grab the C and slide to D. Then grab the G and slide to A. And then you kind of hear them shift back to that G. And then you start it over again, the E. Just slide this B to C, let that C ring, and then you're going to grab this D harmonic there on the 5th fret on the D string. He grabs that harmonic. He grabs the harmonic and then he just dives the bar like crazy, like this. And then just basically hit a D into an E right there. A cool riff and tons of power and energy, you know, when you hear it. It's built on, you know, basic power chords. But it just, you know, it just punches you right in the face. Up next is Stormwind from Wings of Tomorrow, and it starts with this opening, you know, lead part, and then the rhythm part starts, but something like this. Intro solo is kind of built around like E minor. You know, we're doing this, you hear that low E open, and you're hearing this. Something like that. You do that twice, you're going to hear the series of these kind of inverted power chords, and we've talked about these before, Metallica and some of the metal stuff we've looked at, and it's loosely based around E minor, and it's really just these 2-note clusters on the A and the D with the low E string open. So it's really just these little pieces of chords, you know, a little piece of A minor, a little piece of G, a little piece of F sharp minor right there, like that. And it's basically moving its way back to E. You know, E minor, which is where all those notes come from. And then right there, start on that little piece of G, move back to that little piece of F sharp minor, and then D major to E minor, like that. That's basically what we're hitting there. And then when you combine those two together, combine them together, you got Stormwind. Up next is On the Loose, which is also from the Final Countdown, and it's something like this. So right there, it basically opens with this, and that's like a partial A minor 7. There's also an intro, guitar solo that happens right there too. But that little piece of A minor 7, it's basically the open A string, and you're barring the D and the G on the 5th fret right there. Very simple, chord riff, but it's just rocking, just really punching it really hard right there. And then you hear the C to G to D power chords. Like that. And then right there is where he starts the lead. Or something like that. But that's a cool song and a simple riff, but it's just rocking. Up next we have some Marcello action, and this is just the beginning, which is from the Out of This World album, and something like this. So right there, it starts with this weird, or it's not weird, but it's a really cool harmonic fill, and he's doing this. So it's kind of lined up along the 5th fret and ends on the 3rd fret there on the G string, like this. And then he basically is moving in, banging on the low E string and hitting this D power chord. So he's kind of bouncing off that low E open and grabbing this D, and then an A over C sharp right there. C power chord to an E. And he kind of does this little slight bend and then grabs the E note there on the D string on the 2nd fret. And then do that again. And you hear this really fast fill. And you could play it a couple different ways. I actually prefer to play it right here. Seems like it kind of falls the way it sounds like it does on the album. Like that. And he's just really walking down like an E blues, basically. And then slide that D into E right there. And you could also do that lick, instead of doing it here, you could also do it right there. But it just doesn't really sound like the album when you do it that way. It sounds more like the album over here. Give it a listen and see what you think, but that's basically just the beginning. Up next to the song Towers Colin, which is from Out of This World, and once again it's Marcello. Really cool riff though, something like this. Busy single note riff in the beginning. It's kind of loosely based around E Dorian, because we're targeting that C sharp right there. And you've got this. So after that single note riff right here, G to an A power chord right there. And then do the riff again. And then a G to a D power chord. Do the riff again. And do that G to A. And then the last time, rhythm just kind of changes a little bit right there. And it starts the verse right there. Cool song, and that's a really cool riff. I love those kind of single note, riffs mixed with chords. last example is from Superstitious, which is also from the Out of This World album. And this is definitely the most popular song, during Key's time with the band Europe. And this is right after the vocal intro, but you got this part. So right there, we're basically in D minor. And he's grabbing this A and C, and then this D, C to D power chord move. And then this little piece of D minor 7, that C note and that F note, and that's going to move back to where you have C and E. So that's like a little piece of D minor 7 and a little piece of D7 sus2 right there. The second time after you do that chord slide, you're going to move this little piece of D minor 7 up a whole step and then back. So you're kind of holding that 7 and 8 right there. Then do the first one again. And the last time, just moving between that D and C power chord right there. And that's a great song, and the guitar solo in that tune is just brilliant. And I've heard Paul Gilbert and a bunch of people talk about Key Marcello and the soloing, in Superstitious. And there's a whole bunch of, great moments on that album with Key. And definitely, you've got 9 albums with John Norum you can choose from. So there's plenty to find with John Norum. And then just a couple albums with Key Marcello. But check all this stuff out. It's great. It's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Europe. And definitely there's a lot of music. I just mentioned that a moment ago. But there's 11 albums to choose from. And I was tempted to show, some more recent, examples and more recent music. But if you've been watching my channel and kind of following, my habits, I have a tendency to fall, like into a couple albums, or especially if we start traveling back in time. I got hung up on certain albums, from certain bands. And the same thing happened here with Europe. As soon as I kind of revisited, the Final Countdown, Out of This World, Wings of Tomorrow, and some of these albums, I thought, yeah, I'm going to have to hit the classic stuff. So depending on the feedback and comments, I could definitely do another installment of this and feature, some more recent music. Because definitely John Norum has been very active with the band since the early 2000s. So once he returned to the group, they just started pumping out music and started touring and performing together again, which is really cool. And I would love to see Key Marcello. He has had like some solo albums released. I think the most recent was like 2016. I don't honestly remember the name of that album off the top of my head. But I would love to see Key do some more music too and release, some other ideas, because he's a phenomenal guitarist, just like John Norum. But anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to the Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.